Today's notes are going to be on the processes of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. These notes will be on the front of your sheet called Photosynthesis and Cellular Respiration Notes, starting up at the top where it says energy for living things comes from blank. The reason we're looking at these two processes comes down to cellular energy. All living things need energy. We talked about that with metabolism. Metabolism is the sum of those chemical reactions that provide energy for an organism. And photosynthesis and cellular respiration are the two processes that organisms are going to get that energy from. And so all energy for living things comes from food. For animals and for fungi, this is in the form of consuming something else. For plants, it's by making it. And almost all the energy in food is going to come from the sun. When it comes to energy use, there are two types of organisms. There are autotrophs and there are heterotrophs. Autotrophs are organisms that can produce their own food. So auto means self and troph means nutrition. So an autotroph is an organism that provides nutrition to themselves by making it. And organisms typically use light energy to produce this food. These are plants, some microorganisms. There's specific types of protista that can make their own nutrients. There's some bacteria that can make their own nutrients, but plants are the ones that you've probably heard of and are most familiar with. So autotroph means that they are making their own food. We, as humans and as animals, are not autotrophic. We cannot make our own food from light energy. We must get our energy from consuming something else. Therefore, we are heterotrophs. And a heterotroph is an organism that cannot make their own food. They must consume another organism to get that energy. Hetero means other. Troph still means nutrition. So we are getting our nutrition, our nutrients from some other source. We cannot make it ourselves. So we have to consume something else, whether that's other plants or animals, to get the food and the energy that we need. All animals are autotrophic, all fungus is autotrophic, and some bacteria and microorganisms are autotrophic. Now, the reason for all of this is to get cellular energy. Photosynthesis, cellular respiration, both of these processes are happening so that organisms can get cellular energy. And ATP, we've talked about this before, ATP is the energy of the cell. It's that molecule that holds the energy for all life functions. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. On your notes, you see that it says ATP equals the cell energy, and there's a picture of it. You can see on the left here is that adenine, and then in the middle we have a ribose, which is a sugar, and then on the far right we have the 3 phosphate groups. And when the bond is broken here between these phosphate groups, that's when energy is released. As I was mentioning on the other slide, the energy is stored in the bonds of the compounds. So when this bond right here is broken, then the energy is released. So on your paper, please write that ATP hydrolysis breaks the bonds to release energy. Remember, we talked about hydrolysis is the addition of water to break something. So lyse means to break. So when we add water to this process, that phosphate bond is broken, and now we have this phosphate over here by itself, and then we have this here, which is ADP, because now it's only 2 phosphates instead of 1, and then we get that energy release in the process. So the first process we're going to look at is photosynthesis. And the process of photosynthesis involves taking the energy of the sun and making it or transforming it into glucose, which is sugar. We know that's the simple carbohydrate, a monosaccharide. So we use sunlight to make energy. This is on the back side of your note sheet where it says photosynthesis. And then you have a picture of a leaf, and there are 3 things on the left that are going into the process of photosynthesis to produce the 2 things on the right. The first thing that's necessary is there must be sunlight present. Sunlight has to be there because that's the driving force of photosynthesis. That's where the energy is coming from. Carbon dioxide is going to be taken in by the leaves of the plant. Water is going to be absorbed by the roots. And when all those things combine, we get the process of photosynthesis, which is taking place in order to produce oxygen and glucose, that sugar molecule. This is a chemical reaction. Whenever I talk about and think about chemical reactions, I kind of think of it as like baking a cake. The things on the left, these are our ingredients. We're putting these in, and we have to have enough energy, in this case it's the form of sunlight, to get the product that we want. The products for photosynthesis are oxygen and glucose. But if we don't have that energy, our cake is never going to bake. Our chemical reaction is never going to take place, and we're not going to get the products that we want. So photosynthesis is the process of taking carbon dioxide and water with enough sunlight energy to make oxygen and glucose. So we're transforming those molecules from carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and glucose. You should also be filling this in under the function table in the function row where it says photosynthesis. The function of photosynthesis is to take energy from the sunlight to make glucose. Now the location, where this is all happening. So photosynthesis occurs in plants, and in plants it's happening primarily in the leaves of the plant. Within the leaves of the plant, within the cells, it's happening in an organelle called the chloroplast. And we talked about this when we talked about our cell organelles. The chloroplast is where photosynthesis is taking place. The next row is the equation for photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is a chemical reaction. We just talked about that. And so there are things that are going to be going into the process to get certain products. Our reactants, so on the left, you need to write that carbon dioxide, which is CO2, and water, which is H2O, that's the chemical formula, with the presence of light energy, goes to form glucose, which is C6H12O6. It's a huge molecule, plus oxygen, which is O2. Now you may have noticed there's some sixes before some of these things. And what that tells us is we have to have 6 carbon dioxide molecules. We have to have 6 water molecules with light energy to get 1 glucose and 6 oxygen molecules. So you do need to include the sixes when you're writing this down. And then below that where it says the reactants, the things on the right, these are the reactants. Okay, so carbon dioxide, water, and light, those are the reactants of photosynthesis. The products are glucose and oxygen. Chlorophyll is the pigment inside the chloroplast that absorbs light. This means that in the chloroplast, in that organelle, chlorophyll is a green pigment that's inside there that's absorbing the light that's needed for photosynthesis. When the light is absorbed by this pigment, all of the light colors are absorbed except green. If you look here, the rainbow of light, right? White light has all of the colors of the rainbow. And when that light hits the chlorophyll, every single color of light is absorbed except green. And so we see here, green is being reflected, and that reflection goes into our eyes, which is why we see plants as being green. Now, the other process that happens to get cellular energy is cellular respiration. Cellular respiration can be aerobic or anaerobic, and we'll talk about what that means here. But cellular respiration, the function, so this is on your table, on the back side of your notes, underneath function for cell respiration. The function of cellular respiration is for energy to be released from glucose as ATP. So energy of glucose is released in the body as ATP. So we're transforming that stored energy in our food into cellular energy called ATP so that we can move and breathe and function and do everything that we need to be alive. The location of cellular respiration is the mitochondria. So our mitochondria is where our ATP is being produced, and we know this from our EO2. We know that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It produces energy for our bodies, and this is where cellular respiration takes place because this is where it's produced, the ATP. All right, so on my slide, when I had it on the PowerPoint, it was all nice and laid out, and now it got shifted. So the process, or the chemical equation for cellular respiration is we have glucose on the left, so this is what's being put into the equation. We have glucose and oxygen, and in our mitochondria, when we go through cellular respiration, we produce carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. So that's the written form of the equation, but you do need to know the chemical equation with the chemical formulas. So glucose, the formula for glucose is C6H12O6. The chemical formula for oxygen is O2, but we need 6 oxygens with 1 glucose to go through cellular respiration so that we can produce 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water molecules, and then we get 36 ATP. So every time that we consume carbohydrates and they get broken down into the glucose, 1 glucose molecule can produce 36 ATP molecules for us, which is a really pretty good system. We get a lot of energy for the amount of glucose that we consume. Then you need to write down reactants, and in this case the reactants are over here, the glucose and the oxygen, and the products are the carbon dioxide, the water, and the ATP. Make sure you're including those numbers with them. Underneath the table for cellular respiration, you will see that there are the two types listed there, aerobic and anaerobic. Anaerobic, if you know anything about prefixes, the AN or A means without. So aerobic tells us that oxygen is present. Anaerobic tells us that it is not. So aerobic means it requires oxygen. Anaerobic does not. There's no oxygen required or available. And so it goes through either one of 2 types of respiration, which is alcoholic or lactic acid. So there are 2 types of anaerobic respiration. There's alcoholic and lactic acid. And these are also called fermentation. And when this happens, we get alcoholic acid or lactic acid produced. The problem, though, is that when there is no oxygen present, we get a lot less ATP as a result. And so these are not very efficient when it comes to getting as much energy as needed. Okay, so up at the top of your paper, says glucose, and in parentheses, that's sugar, goes to form the energy for life, and we take glucose from our food and release it into energy. And so I want you to try to fill in the picture with the arrows, what's going into the process of cellular respiration that's happening in that boy, and what's going to be made as a result. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to plug in all the stuff that we've learned to fill in this sheet. This is the front of your sheet. And so what we're going to see is that cellular respiration and photosynthesis are very intertwined. They're very connected. And so in this process, the boy, what's one product he is giving off that's going to be absorbed by the plant? And that is water, right? So water is something that we give off both in breathing, in perspiring, in urinating. We give off water, and plants are going to take these up through their roots. At the same time, we are also giving off carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is going to be breathed out by us and taken in by the plant's leaves. Plants, on the other hand, they're going to be giving off oxygen from their leaves, and we're going to be taking that in to our lungs. They're also going to, through photosynthesis, be producing glucose, which is sugar, and we take that in through consuming food so that we can go through cellular respiration. Now, without oxygen, we're going to either have alcoholic respiration or lactic acid. And if we go through aerobic respiration, so if we have oxygen present, then we're going to go and make up to 36 ATP, which is huge. We're going to be having a lot of ATP present. And that is the end of the notes on cellular respiration and photosynthesis. You need to know the chemical reactions and equations. You need to know the reactants. You need to know the products. This will be very important for your test.